Okay, awesome. So my name's Rob Holt, and I'm a dev on the PowerShell team, and I'm a co-maintainer of the PowerShell extension for Visual Studio Code, but I also work on the PowerShell engine a lot, and that includes the PowerShell language. And what I want to show you today is some of the new operators that we've added in PowerShell 7, which I think are going to make your experience using PowerShell even nicer than it already is. So the first thing I want to show you is the ternary operator, and just so you can search this on the web, ternary is spelled T-E-R-N-A-R-Y. So the ternary operator is designed to simplify a scenario like this. Say you have a condition, right, and you want to set a variable based on that condition. So maybe you've got if condition, right, x equals 1, but if the condition is false, you want to set x equals to 2. See that because we set condition to true, that we follow this, we follow the true branch here, and so x goes to 1. But you might also know that in PowerShell you can set the value of an you can get the value of a whole statement as out of that statement, and you can assign from it. So you can do something like first of what I just did, where if the condition is false, then we set 1, and if the condition is true, we set 2. So if I run that. But even in this scenario, we've still written a whole bunch of stuff when really all we cared about was the condition and the 1 and the 2. And so we added this ternary operator in PowerShell to really get to the core of what you're trying to do in a small condensed situation like this. So you can see that when the condition is true, it becomes this whole expression takes the value of the thing between the question mark and the colon, and otherwise the condition is false, then it takes a value between after the colon. And so now x is back to 1, and I can do something like negate this condition, and x goes back to 2. And you don't have to assign after this either. You can use the whole condition to I'll give you an example. So say we're on Windows and we want to do string comparison, then usually on Windows we want to do case insensitive string. But often on non-Windows platforms we want to do case sensitive string comparison. And so you can use a ternary operator to really make that syntax a lot nicer so that you don't have to use a lot of that beefy if-else brace stuff. So you can see that now I have my strcomp variable set to the correct string comparison form on my platform. Okay, the next thing I want to show you are the null coalescing operators. So these basically allow you to use less syntax to deal with null-like things in PowerShell. So in PowerShell, if I haven't defined a variable, then it's effectively null. And often you'll find that you want to set some variable based on whether that something else is null is null or not. And so, example, you might have something like this, right? Where Z is set to some default if Y is null, default of A, and otherwise it's B. Or a common thing to do is to have a default in case you're, say, Y, if Y is null, then we take a default. But if Y is not null, then we use Y. But this is kind of there's a trap here because PowerShell does special comparison with null like this, and PS Script Analyzer would warn you about that. But the other thing is that we just use a lot of syntax to do all of this. And we could use a ternary, but we've introduced an even shorter syntax for this particular case because it's so common. And so let's reset Y to be null. Now we want Z to be Y, or if Y is null, we want it to be, say, B. And if we set y to a, we run this again, and we see that instead z gets set to y. And so the purpose of this is that you can easily sift through a null and set defaults. And again, this is something that C# introduced early on. And better than that, you can actually condense the assignment down so that this is a slightly different case where you only perform the assignment if z is null, say. So say we run this, z is still a because z exists. But if we set z to null, and then we run this again, because z was null, this assignment goes ahead. And so it says, okay, C is the default value of Z. So this is like what we were doing with Y before, where in the case where Z is null, we set the value of our default value C. But in the case where Z had the value of A, we didn't assign C because it was non-null. Okay, the last thing I want to show you is a slightly different kind of operator in PowerShell, and those are the pipeline chain operators. These are something that CMD and Bash have, but here's a classic Bash example where you want to do something like install a program, and then you want to run that program only if the installation succeeded, right? I'm running on a Windows machine, so I can't actually run that command. But I have a reasonable example for you, I think. So say I have a file called ackle.txt, right? And I want to set the permissions on that file to give me full access, which obviously I already have, but just purposes of example. Succeeds, right? And you can see from the message that it succeeds, but this is effectively console output, and that's not really helpful if you're trying to write a script that incorporates this. So you can use these pipeline chain operators to pick up on the success of this native command. And that's what these are designed for, is better native command interoperability. So conventionally in PowerShell, you would have written something like write host ackle set, right? Something like that. And you can see that that when this succeeds, we write out ackle set. You might be more familiar with last exit code not equals 0, right? Oh, sorry. And again, you can see that ackle set has been written. But the idea is that this is kind of time consuming to write, and it's not very nice in an interactive scenario. And so now you can use a pipeline chain operator to determine that, yes, it did succeed. But success isn't always very interesting. What you really want is something that will do something like stop your script when it fails to succeed, right? So say we want to set the owner of this administrator, right? You can see that it says here that it failed processing one file, but otherwise the output looks pretty identical. But one thing that's changed is that the success code encoded by $? Is false. And so you can do something like use this result to throw that thing like ownership. And that will translate nicely from this native command paradigm where the exit code encodes whether we succeeded into sort of PowerShell's land where we think in errors and exceptions and things. So as I say, this is in a world where you have more native utilities, like on Unix platforms, this is perhaps slightly more useful, but there are always times when using a native command makes sense, and especially in an interactive world, the pipeline chain operators can give you a sort of a leg up in that sphere because they just make it a lot more easy. It's a much easier tool to reach for, to blend in your into an interactive prompt using native commands and with other commands. And in fact, this actually works with non-native commands perfectly well as well. So if you do, say, get item on a file that doesn't exist, even if you suppress the error action, you'll see that it's not a successful command. You suppress the error, but the success wasn't there. And so you can do something like trivial example, but where you say, oh, I didn't find the file, and so the file's not found. And I didn't want to log an error because, I don't know, I don't really consider it an error. I'm just sort of testing for the file. Again, sort of a contrived scenario, but just to demonstrate that these work equally well with commandlet and native commands. Anyway, that's all I've got to show you. Thanks for listening. Hope to see you next time.